So we're going to continue to explore and do a deep dive into mindfulness and its connections to us being able to kind of live a more relaxed, a more stress-free life that is not chaotic, that it has calm, peace, and above all, a pause button built into our daily reactions and responses to various things that may happen to us. We left off on a previous video talking about the idea of authenticity and how we can use mindfulness as a way to navigate to what constitutes our authentic self. So in this video, I'm going to concentrate on another aspect of mindful thinking and mindful living, which is the idea of self-compassion. Self-compassion, that is a difficult one, particularly if you've gone through a range of traumas and a whole sequence of events in your life like we all have. When you sort of scan back, there will be things that you think you could have probably done better. There be things that you feel that maybe you weren't your best self. And you may kind of arrive at a place, some people certainly arrive at a place where they have self-hate, where they have self-doubt, where they are critical of themselves. Particularly if you've experienced childhood trauma, you kind of emerge with a negative narrative about who you are, because that's what you're told. As part of the abuse cycle, you are continuously bombarded with what you're not, what you're bad, what you're not good at, the fact that you're not good, the fact that you're terrible, the fact that you are misbehaving, the fact that you are a terrible person, the fact that you are a terrible daughter or a terrible son, the fact that you are rubbish at school, the fact that you are terrible at sports, or any one of a number of things. We can emerge from childhood with a whole stack of things that we are told and then we believe we are rubbish at. And of course, that isn't always the truth. We accept it because we have been told it, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's an authentic reflection of who we actually are. And often, before we can develop the gifts and talents that we have innately, built into us, the idea of those talents is destroyed by the narrative that we have adopted, that we've been given. It does not belong to us. So the reason for why we want to, find out who we really are and navigate back to our authenticity. So a route to be able to do that, in addition to the generally becoming aware of yourself and using mindfulness as a means of generating the space to do that, is to be kind to yourself. And that's a really weird concept. If you sort of think about, well, what does that mean? How does that actually work? It's really about not allowing the negative self-talk and self-criticisms to be rooted. It's like you won't allow those messages to exist without a challenge. If somebody came up to you in the street and said you were a complete, twit, you're useless. If somebody just came to you and said you're useless, in that moment, what would you do? Would you accept what they were saying and be deeply hurt, or would you react and be angry and cross and respond appropriately? So you wouldn't accept it, for the most part, and certainly most of us wouldn't accept that kind of comment from somebody outside of us, right? But we accept that as a comment from inside of us all the time, because that's kind of how we were raised, or that's what an experience or an environment taught us about ourselves. It's a lie. It is fake news. It's a complete and utter lie. And it's a construct based on the environment that you were raised in, or the situation you found yourself in, where you were told that's what you were, told that's who you are. It's accepted because really ostensibly too young to kind of fight it and change it. So we become subject to that narrative, and we grow up with it, and it becomes a part of our psyche, and part of what actually completely undermines our capacity to be able to be anything but those negatives. So mindfulness, which is the ability to be able to give us some space and time to process and think, And along with that, the self-awareness, and along with that, the idea about, what our values are and what's important to us. And along with that, the idea that we can be something other than what we were labeled with. The root to that is to be kind to ourselves. And often a really helpful way of doing that is to think of yourself as a child, just as a kid, okay? If you look at any kid, at an age that you might have been when you may have received some of those messages, a 4-year-old, a 5-year-old, any 4 or 5-year-old you might think of in your, sort of field, your family, your networks, and then you put those kinds of comments aimed at them, how would you sort of think about that? How would you feel about that? If those comments were angled, or you were in the vicinity where those comments were angled at a child of that age, you'd be perhaps outraged. You'd be angry. You'd want to stand up and fight for that kid that was receiving this negative kind of message about themselves. So in the same manner, we do the same for ourselves. We cut ourselves the slack. We allow ourselves the capacity to challenge the narrative that we are the things that we were told we were, the negative things that we were told we were. So through mindfulness and mindful thinking and mindful being, and through being present in any given moment, generating the space and the calm that we need to begin to pull things apart, in those moments we can be kind to ourselves. We can begin to overwrite and rewrite some of these negative narratives that have kind of impacted us perhaps our entire lives. So instead of allowing the narrative to say to us, to whisper to us, sometimes in a really unkind, profoundly cruel way, that we are garbage, that we are rubbish, that we can't do this, we can't do that. Who do we think we are by thinking that we could do this? We're not loved, nobody cares about us, everybody hates us, nobody thinks we're funny, nobody thinks we're nice, nobody thinks we're good. To allow those thoughts to exist without challenge, and to believe what is essentially fake news conjured up by someone other than you in your life, is doing yourself a complete disservice. And that is what we understand by being unkind to yourself, is by accepting those negative comments and statements as belonging to you. And we do that by reflecting, okay? And the mindfulness element gives us the capacity and time to reflect. So in the context and course of when we are in a mindful sort of time, when we take ourselves out, or making that cup of tea, or generating that space that, away from everything else for even a few moments, we can challenge that narrative by saying, you know what, I'm okay. You know what, actually, I've done this, I've done that. I am a good person. I've done good things. I've been a good person. I've done these things over here. I've done these things over here. I've been this. I've been that. I've made mistakes. But you know what? They're not failures. And that's another kind of element of being kind to yourself. I learned a long time ago through all sorts of issues that I've experienced that I refuse to accept things as being a failure. I accept things as being part of a learning curve and a learning process. And I can look at things that perhaps I've done that were questionable and think, well, you know what, that wasn't great. That wasn't my best self. I could have done that better. But in that moment, in the context of that time, given what was going on for me, in those moments, you know what, I can be kind to myself, because that's all I could do. I was hurting, I was in pain, I was reacting, I was carrying all of this baggage, and I couldn't have reacted any other way given the situation I was in and the weight of material that I was carrying. So I can see that on reflection and in being kind to myself as being part of the process, in that I hadn't got to the point yet where I was able to look at it as part of a learning curve. So it's like, okay, so it's not like I failed in a particular relationship, but it is like, I wasn't my best self because I was still learning how to do relationship, how to be in a relationship, because my only reference of relationship is the terrible reflections that I was given when I was growing up, perhaps. I mean, just one kind of idea. So I didn't know any better. I thought that's what normal was. I thought these terrible relationships I grew up in and witnessed and was subject to was, the reality of all that was. And it took a long time to realise that wasn't true. That actually those relationships were in themselves difficult and not necessarily a reflection of who I was. So I'm working myself out, and I'm working towards a better version of myself. And mindfulness helps us to generate the pause that we need to be kind to ourselves and reframe some of the things that have happened in our lives, some of the things that perhaps we've done as part of the learning process, part of the working out, given the fake news we've been carrying about ourselves, working out what's true and what isn't true. That actually, underneath some of the pain and the agitation and the frustration and the anxieties that have been generated and created because of my journey, I'm a good person and I'm capable of doing good. I'm capable of being my best self. And I realise that actually I've been damaged. I realise that I've been hurt. I realise that my past and my journey has delivered to me this sequence of fake headlines about who I am as a person. So mindfulness generates the space, the self-awareness to begin to remove those banners, those headlines about who we are, and replace them with something more authentic, more genuine, more real. So being kind to ourselves is another key element we use through mindfulness to rewrite who we conclude that we are. And how that helps us is that in any given new situation we find ourselves in, this new awareness, this new sense of who we are, this more authentic position of who we think of as ourselves, can be given an opportunity to actually exist. So you have a situation that perhaps in the past you would have reacted to in a particularly negative way. You have a choice. Once you have done the mindful exploration and you have access to the self-awareness and you are kind to yourself in terms of the journey that you've lived, in those moments you have a choice. You can see that you are reacting, relating to the fake news of what you were told you were. And in that moment, you can choose to not be that and to be the more genuine version of you, the person that you would like to be, the best version of you. Because you recognize then through mindful reflection that you do have a choice, that you can choose to be your best self and that you aren't subject to the fake news. Once you know what it is, I guess that's the key point, is navigating to what that fake news is and how it's impacted and affected you. And a primary purpose of therapy and a therapeutic process is actually that, is to discover where that fake news lives, how it's encompassed your way of thinking, and then as a result of that, how we can start to remove that, rewrite it, and come up with a more authentic version of who you are. So mindfulness sits right smack in the middle of that process. It's kind of like the conductor. It's the mechanism by which we can generate the peace in the chaos, generate the space when there is none, for us to be able to evaluate and reflect on the things that we've been speaking about. So you can find the place where you can see your authentic self, who you would have been in a sense had those things not happened to you, who your authentic self is as a result of being your best self. So I'm going to stop there because we're going to go on to speak other segments of mindfulness in other videos. I just wanted to kind of do this one on its own because I feel it's such an important idea that you can look in the mirror and you can be kind to yourself. You can look in the mirror and say, you know what, I did the best that I could. I've done the best that I can with the information that I had. Now I've got an opportunity to redress, to reflect, and realise that I've been on a journey of learning. And now I begin to recognize who I really am, what I really am, who I am underneath the fake news, and to choose the authentic person, to choose my best self, to represent me as opposed to the construct which was created by somebody else. I hope that's been somewhat helpful. Join me for the next video where we will begin to delve a little bit more into mindfulness and some of the ways it plays out in our lives. See you then.